Good morning. It is 10 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get our October webinar going. We have Heather from TFND here with us, our great partner in this webinar series. She is going to be sharing TFND's legislative priorities and letting you know how to get involved in education and advocacy for the session coming up in January. So without anything further, I will turn it over to Heather.
Thank you so much, Abby, and thanks to everyone for being here today. I have some brief slides that I'll go through, and then I'll show you all a few resources and give you just a quick look at some of the websites that you can utilize as session gets closer. But we will have kind of a technical webinar in December that will go through exactly how to use the nd.gov website, the testimony platforms for submission, virtual capabilities to participate in hearings. We'll go through all of those technical details in December. Today will be more so of an overview of our policy priorities, some of our activities that you can do to support grassroots efforts leading up to session, and then, like I said, just a quick overview on some websites and additional resources that you can familiarize yourself with in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and I have just a few PowerPoint slides to pull up to show you all. And then can you all hear or see my screen at this point? Yes, no, maybe.
You can see your screen. You might want to put it in presentation mode.
Presentation mode, okay. Let's go this route. How's that?
Yes, there you go.
Oh, excellent. So TFND's 2025 legislative priorities were released a few weeks back to all of our partners. So if you've taken the time to read through our memo, you probably are a little bit familiar with some of this, but I'll explain a little bit of my board of directors and mine and Andrew's thought processes just to get everybody on the same page. Our top priority this session go around is going to be implementing a tax on the ENDS products, the electronic nicotine delivery systems. Last session, if you recall, we finally had some success. Third time was the charm in getting the ENDS products classified as tobacco products. Prior to 2023, they still were not, and so they weren't included in any tax policy, regulations, licensure, or anything like that. And so now, the bill took effect August 1st of 2023. So since that time now, all electronic products have been classified as tobacco in North Dakota, and they do require a tobacco license for sale. It also enacted some local ordinance regulation and support, having that classification on them. And so some of you all have local ordinances that have specific things that, electronic tobacco retailers have to fulfill in your specific communities. And so that kind of triggered some of those policy regulations as well. But now we have to take it to the next step. One of our strategies last session was to decouple that classification from the tax that we had in the two previous session attempts, where it was kind of all inclusive, shoring them up, to get them to give them parity with other tobacco products in the state. And so now we have to go back around and close the tax loophole that we left open in order to get the classification to move through. So that being said, ENDS products include any sort of electronic product, and the definitions in our Century Code are pretty good and specific and don't leave any room for interpretation for the most part. But just to be clear, it does include anything like Juul, the new Puff Bars uses similar products. They don't have any tobacco tax on them at all right now, and so they're only subject to like sales tax or any local or other state applicable taxes for products in general or retail goods in general. And so we know that these are just as addictive to other tobacco products. We know that for the most part nicotine is still derived from the tobacco plant for these products, even though you can have synthetic nicotine in use at this point. And so we want them treated the same within our tobacco tax structure. And there are a few different ways that you can go about doing this. And you see a wide variety across the nation. You can pull up different maps. In fact, we've shared different maps at multiple different times and used it in our testimony in previous sessions where it shows the map of what states are enacting what policies. But we do know that 21 states use a percentage of price method. That is the method we typically prefer, to have them be the same as our cigars and cigarillos, and those products are taxed, which in North Dakota would be 28% of the wholesale price. And some states do levy a per unit tax, most commonly a per milliliter tax. We did do a little research on that during an interim committee hearing one year that we were invited into, and we figured out that if we had to go that route, while it's not our preferred route, if that was the route we could get the most support to get it passed, we found that it would need to be at least 30 cents per milliliter in order to have that dollar increase that we like to promote when it comes to tobacco tax policy, to get the health benefits to really kick in. Once you're below that dollar increase at a time, then the health benefits aren't as pronounced, and that's what we want to promote. And so for our state, we found that that 30 cents per milliliter would be what we would have to pursue if that was how our bill needed to be written, because of legislator sponsorship issues or trying to garner additional support, or if it were to get amended after we submit our percentage of wholesale price method, then we would know what it had to be in order to make that still viable and beneficial for our citizens. And then there are several states that use kind of a combination approach to taxation. And so we've left ourselves a little bit of wiggle room in how we're talking about this and pursuing this with our legislators, that if we have to make some concessions and do certain percentages and per milliliters to get what we need, because there is some concern about, well, what if you sell the device but there's no liquid with it, or what are the batteries taxed at? And all kinds of things have come up in our committee hearings in the past couple of sessions as we've pursued this policy. And so we do have some wiggle room to mimic some of the states that are using a combination method. Our second top priority is to protect, educate, and advocate for our program funding. And this one is very key for most of the people on the webinar this morning. I would think I saw lots of our local public health unit friends and other partners on as we were logging in. And so to be clear, North Dakota is still fairly well funded when you compare us to other states across the nation. I think we rank in the 5th, 6th, 7th place historically since the funding was reduced back in 2017. And so our funding isn't dire, so to speak, but it's also still not at the CDC fully recommended level. And that is 9.8 million per year, and our current funding typically has been, or last session was 7.1 million per year. And so you can see it's somewhat close, and you know, it's been okay. We've been really efficient and effective with the use of our time, talent, and treasure here in North Dakota when it comes to the tobacco prevention and control program. That being said, we did finally have some success last legislative session with getting a small piece of funding restored to the tune of around $800,000 got added back in that had been previously taken out. And so we'd like to see more success like that and get us closer to that, you know, 9.8 to 10 million per year mark. And so as we go through those budget hearings, we want to really lean on some of your success stories and have your support in the hallways, talking with your districts and legislators about how vital the TCPC program is in your local communities and what successes you are seeing with, you know, providing education, providing cessation services and support, and addressing the youth issues we know have popped up across the state that we hear about all the time from community leaders. And so Andrew and I have been putting together success sheets and talking point sheets that highlight the work that's being done within the program. And then our synthesis report has been a vital tool that's been put out by professional data analysts on behalf of the Department of Health and Human Services. And I cannot sing the praises of that report enough. And I will show that at the end here when I'm going through resources, how to find that and access that and use that with your policymakers and decision makers so that you can show them some really nicely put together charts, graphs, you know, talking points, messaging, all of that. And so We'll go through that a little bit more at the end. I have that ready to rock and roll and show. But the program funding, we do want to see an increase again this year. And with the legislature, it's typically been easier to gain support for that when we have specific requests or ideas or programs or services that can be provided in conjunction with what we're already doing, or in addition to what we're already doing, it just not anything that's too duplicative. And it seems to be the more specific the service, the easier it is to get support. For instance, last session, that $800,000 was approved for 2 specific programs. One was outlining some additional support for youth education and prevention, and the other was to do the pilot program for the pharmacy NRT projects that were going on in specific local communities. I believe 10 different communities were test pilot communities across the state. And so that funding helped support that project launch. So if there are more things like that that you have kind of in the hopper in your local communities, don't hesitate to reach out to Andrew and I to let us know about them so we can add them into our messaging as we talk about support for the program overall. And then kind of our next tier of priorities in this particular order, after those top 2, which are, to be specific, 3-legged stool policies, which is typically what TFND goes after the most, since we don't have our 3-legged stool complete at this point in time. That's where we always put most of our energies legislatively. And so in this next tier of priorities, you can see protecting and defending our indoor smoke-free air law is at the top. That's our 3rd leg of the stool. And so, as some of you know, or as most of you know, in 2023, we finally had the first chink in the armor get through. And that was an exemption for cigar bars to reopen, or cigar lounges, I believe is how it ultimately got worded. But they were able to reopen as of August 1st of 2023. And you can see that there were a few stipulations put in place for those entities or businesses, but not many. The language was, I think, purposefully kept fairly vague, and there really are no guardrails or like reporting, enforcement capabilities, monitoring capabilities. None of that was really put in. And so we'll be watching for opportunities to see if we can't tighten up the language in that exemption and maybe have some more specifics put in place to make it more difficult for those businesses to open and share walls and all of those types of things that we were, super concerned about in the first place. That being said, we do have one that has opened in Mandan so far. If you have heard of any others, please let us know. I know you all are pretty good about letting us know when that happens in your community, but if you continue to hear rumblings, or if they're trying to get through a local ordinance that's blocking them from opening, as some of you have stronger local ordinances now than state law, which is a good thing. If you don't have a stronger local ordinance than the state law, you might want to consider continuing to work on getting that through locally, so that you can have the protection of not having those businesses able to open. But if you are hearing about anything, let us know, because we do anticipate more attacks on the smoke-free law this session. Locally, we've already heard of one of the smoke shops in town, in a town, asking the city and city commission about opening a hookah lounge. And so we know that they're thinking they saw this exemption get through and it was just like what we thought it would be. Now they want more. So I would not be surprised to hear more attempts for hookah lounges, vaping lounges, other tobacco specialty lounges. And we want to make sure that we don't have bills going into session that are trying to get those entities included in this with the cigar lounges. And if they are, we want to be ready to really highlight our opposition and get our grassroots network engaged in that. I know that you guys were great last session with having lots of emails and phone calls and personal visits with your legislators around this. And it showed because it only passed by a couple of votes in the Senate. And so we were really close to holding it off a third time. And so I think that as we start to see more data come out, we'll have easier times in subsequent sessions. But until then, we really have to stay kind of ready and anticipatory to defend our indoor smoke-free air law. and see if we can't get, like I said, some rules and stipulations, added into what was passed last go round. And then in future sessions, as we go forward, I think it might be easier to make the case to rescind the exemption eventually. Though I can't imagine that would be possible this coming session because it's been such a short time. That is always in the back of my board and ours mind as something that we're going to attempt to do. So that being said, we have a smoke-free or indoor smoke-free air law workshop in progress right now. We've had 2 sessions so far. If you've attended those, awesome. Thank you so much for continuing to engage with us. If you haven't, there are still 2 more coming up, one in November and one in December. If you want to participate or offer input or just get the resources that are coming out of those workshops, just let Abby or myself know, and we can make sure that you're connected and getting what you need. So far, we've covered messaging and talking points and updated those, and those will be disseminated soon as they're proofread and finished up. And then we were talking last go around about challenges and what we're seeing in communities and what we can do to customize some of the support and messaging that TFND is able to give. And then, like I said, there's 2 more subsequent sessions coming up yet now through December. Like I said, that's a high priority for TFND, so we want to make sure that we're ready to go. Also in that vein, we will be doing our annual media campaign celebrating the anniversary of North Dakota's indoor smoke-free air law. It was passed via initiated measure in 2012. And so the first week of December is when it took effect, and that's when we'll be doing our celebration. So you'll be seeing some media campaign materials come from Andrew very shortly if you're on our partner list. If you're not on our partners list, just shoot Andrew or myself an email and let us know that you want to receive those campaign materials. It'll be some messaging and talking points, updated ones. It'll be some pre-made social media posts and a timeline showing when we'll be sharing our social media posts. If you just simply want to share from the TFND page, you can do so. But there'll be a way for you to participate and really get some education out into your communities ahead of session in support of that law, talking about why we love it and why we want to keep it as intact as possible. Our next priority on the list is watching for any outside bills or industry sponsor bills, and we'll participate accordingly. If we see something that aligns with our CDC best recommended practices or promising practices, 3-legged stool specifically, but there are a few promising things that we typically would chime in on, possibly in support of, depending on how it's written. We'll watch for those, and then we'll of course be eagle-eyed for any industry sponsored bills to make sure that there is no preemption included. ENDS registries is a hot topic nationally, and I have a couple resources that I'll give to you all today from the Public Health Law Center that have been super helpful and informative as we watch for those, and I'll explain what those are a little bit better in just a bit. But we also watch for labeling, nicotine content, restrictions or allowances, limiting flavorings or restricting flavorings, internet sales restrictive bills. We've attempted a couple of those in the past ourselves. So yeah, we'll be really watching for other bills as we can chime in or offer amendments or opposition as needed, and those will be on the fly. And so if you excuse me, have not already signed up for or have our TFND e-newsletter coming to you every month, there is a opt-in or a subscribe button that we can send your way, or you can find on our website. And I highly encourage you to subscribe and get those e-newsletters coming to you before session, because during session, we will utilize that email approved list to send out all of our action alerts. And so if you want to be in the know in real time, getting those action alerts is one of the best way to do so. We'll report out on anything that's happening on any of the bills that we're either supporting or monitoring or opposing. And then we'll also give specific activities on how you can participate in any of the hearings by sending emails. We'll have links to the nd.gov website and how to participate and just all the background information that you would need. And so those are called the TFND Legislative Action Alerts. You register for those by subscribing to our e-newsletter. And if you don't have a link, we can get you a link. Just let Andrew or myself know. Or if you're already receiving our monthly e-newsletters, you're automatically already subscribed for the action alert emails as well. So that's one of the best ways to get all of this real-time information as these bills that maybe aren't TFND put forward are coming up, so that you can be in the know on all the different tobacco legislation. Typically, we see anywhere from 9 to 13 or 14 bills per session, including ours, that are tobacco related. I think in 2021 we tracked 9 bills. I think last year it might have been 11. So there are quite a few that come through that aren't necessarily from us, and we want to make sure that we're ready for them. And then the last thing that we will be doing, and this is where we typically ask for the most help and support from our partners, is that initiating, educating, and training for support of all three-legged stool policies with our policymakers. And so we'll continue to provide talking sheets, messaging materials, graphics, ads, all the different types of things that we can, that you can use as you talk with your legislators. And after November 5th and the election is over, we highly encourage you, if you're able, to sit down with all of your district representatives and senators and just introduce yourself and talk about what the work you are doing in the tobacco prevention realm entails, whether that's through a local public health unit or a health system or a private business, or just as a concerned citizen, so that they're at least aware of some of what we're promoting when it comes to prevention policy before TFND ever gets in front of them. It's awesome when we have kind of boots on the ground in the local communities talking about your local concerns with the legislators prior to TFND coming in and talking about our state priorities, because they align so closely most of the time. They have a familiarity with what we're already going to be telling them, and it just lends an additional kind of credence or credibility to what we're asking for when we go forward with these policies. And so if you want help coordinating those meetings, or if you want information on how to build relationships with your policymakers, or how to talk to your policymakers, or what kind of messaging is most effective with your policymakers, we'll talk a little bit about that in December when we do our technical call. But we have lots of training materials and previous webinars and other resources that Andrew and I can give you to help coordinate those efforts. But between November 5th and December 31st, if you or partners that you have maybe in your local communities can commit to talking to each and every one of your district's legislators, that would be hugely helpful when it comes to enacting our session priorities and getting policy language through, because it's fast and furious when session starts. And basically, we have a very short window of time before bills start hitting the floor and hearings start occurring, to give them enough education and background to understand why it is we want them to vote the way that we do. Now, that being all said, here are a few ways that you can kind of start making a game plan for how to handle all of that. I have an activity checklist that we'll review in just a moment. That's here, and we'll give you that so you can kind of see if it's something that would fit into your timeline or schedule. But really, now is the time to kind of make your session plan. So whether you plan to drive over to Bismarck, or if you reside in Bismarck and you want to participate in person, kind of start mapping out opportunities or days that you might be able to do that. TFND can sometimes provide support for that if needed. Many of you have been awesome about participating virtually and through the live conferencing options that got set up during COVID. That was kind of the one silver lining of COVID, is that we can now participate in our ND legislative process, via Zoom, and do live testimony that way, watch all the hearings, everything's recorded. If you want to pull up previous session hearings, you can watch them now and familiarize yourself with how things typically go in a hearing. You can submit things online now. It's very easy to submit testimony online. And even though we still lost by a couple of votes on the cigar lounge vote in the Senate, I have to say, I think we set a record for ours anyway, testimony submitted. I think we had 44 pieces of oppositional testimony submitted when all was said and done. It was hugely impactful to be able to reference that and show that this isn't something that our citizens and our public health partners and our health partners wanted. And so we love to see participation like that, and we'll go through all the details of exactly how to do that in December. If you have standing coalition meetings or calls before or during session, let us know that information. If you want more participation or if you want to invite other groups to collaborate with you, we can help share that information. We can help coordinate activities, and TFND will try and hop in and participate whenever possible if it fits into our schedule, just so that we can provide information and resources to your coalitions and, get as many of us connected as possible so that we have a bigger show of grassroots support when it comes time to go into hearings or go into a floor vote. I already talked about our newsletters and call to action. And then we do have, oh no, I forgot to change the date. Sorry, guys. We do have our TFND ACS Candy at the Capitol event. It is a go for this year again. In fact, we had some of our first planning calls already the last few weeks. Please disregard that date. I left the slide from last year in. This year, it will be Monday, January 13th, 2025. And we'll have lots more details, and we will have a registration link hopefully open by November 1st. So you guys can start making a plan to bring students and other interested volunteers and activists to the Capitol in January. So again, that's Monday, January 13th, 2025. ACS CAN and TFND are teaming up once again to do our Awesome Day at the Capitol event. So sorry about that missed date update. Okay, so here's one of the things I also want to talk about. And Abby, I'm going to just do a quick pause for a moment here and ask for any questions. When I'm in presentation mode, I can't see the chat or any of the faces. I only see my presentation. So I'm just going to pause for a minute. If there's anyone that has a question on anything I've covered so far, or if we need to just take a quick little breather, we can do that at this point. And Abby, just shout out if you see anything.
We do have a couple in the queue here, so
Great.
This is good timing. I was just going to see if you wanted to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Brady was asking about the indoor air sessions you spoke of and how to learn more about those.
Excellent. So what I'm talking about is I am trying to invite everyone we could think of. So I'm sorry if certain people missed or didn't see the invitation. This would have been a few months ago, but it's the Indoor Smoke-Free Law Work Group. And all you need to do to get the links to access those is email myself or Abby, and we'll make sure that you're invited to the next one, which I believe is coming up at the first half of November. Abby, do you have that date handy?
Oh, I was just going to pull that up. It
Yeah.
is the 19th.
19th. So November 19th will be the next one. I believe they're at 10 or 10:30 in the morning, and they typically last around an hour. And so if you're interested in participating in the next one, we'll catch you up on what we covered in the first two, and then just send Abby or myself a quick little note via email so we have you in the queue, and we'll get you that invitation.
Okay, the second question. Will TFND be having an ends tax bill for legislators to sponsor?
Yes. Yep, that's what I was talking about at that first slide.
Okay. Can you put the link to the legislative updates email in the chat? Is that something Andrew could fire in for us?
I think so. Andrew, can you put the subscribe link for the e-newsletter in the chat? And if you can't, I can do it at the end if for some reason it's not working for you. But yes, that's a great idea.
And then when is a good time to share these priorities with our coalitions?
The time is now. Everything that we have is public. You can simply utilize the TFND Legislative Priorities memo that you would have received probably about 6 weeks ago. If you don't have that, shoot us a note and we will resend that to you, or I can attempt to, I think it might even already be on our website. When I show our website resources page later on, it might already be there and I can show you the link to that.
And one last question in the chat. Will TFND be providing weekly updates during the legislative session?
Yes, those are the legislative action alerts that I was talking about earlier. And so if you're subscribed to our e-newsletter, you will get those. And then we also link or provide emailed legislative bill trackers. And so if you are wanting to specifically track every single piece of legislation like TFND tracks it, you can have our bill tracker as well. And we typically send those out to our entire partner list on a weekly basis on Fridays. And so if you're on the email list, you're also on the partner list and you should be getting those. But if you aren't, just shoot me a note and say, hey, I'm not getting these, or I want to make sure I'm getting these, and I can double check. I know I'm going to inundate myself with emails today by saying email us, email us, email us, but that's the best way for us to make sure that you're not getting missed, because I don't want anyone to not have the resources that they want. Great
That's
question.
everything that's in the chat right now.
Okay, well, I will continue on. And then Abby, feel free in real time now, if questions pop up in chat, to stop me and let me know.
Sounds good.
Okay, so engaging in the legislative process, as I said, we'll do the technical side of things on this in December. But for now, there's always a few questions that come up, especially if you work in local public health or with city administration, or sometimes even some of the bigger hospitals and health systems have certain rules in place on how people can participate in politics. And even though I don't always consider what we do to be political, sometimes it is. And so I want to make sure that as we're doing this, that no one gets in trouble with their employers or with any grant funding that they might be receiving or anything like that. And so I want to make clear that what TFND is asking you to do when we ask you to help us with the legislative session is that we're solely talking about educating and advocating. And so with education, that would be providing any of our pre-made materials or fact sheets or infographics that talk about the three-legged stool in general, or a certain policy in general, and why it benefits health. And we use tons of resources from our national partners to help us do this. Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, or CTFK, provides amazing fact sheets for a wide variety of tobacco prevention policy topics, and their resources page on their website, campaignfortobaccofreekids.org, is amazing. And so we utilize a lot of their resources as we're trying to explain certain data or information or studies or statistics to our legislators, and I would highly recommend that you do so as well, and I can show that website at the end if needed. We also use a lot of resources directly from the CDC. They also have really good, more technical fact sheets put together a lot of times. And with policymakers, sometimes technical is better. They get really into the deep dive of data and statistics more often than not. And so the CDC website for tobacco prevention and control is another great resource for that. We also provide some of the softer support from Truth Initiative and their resources tab, sometimes showing the more human elements of what our kids are facing speaks to legislators. And so Truth has some great campaigns that kind of really highlight what the young perspective is right now in terms of the electronic products in particular. And so Truth Initiative has some great ones. Our friends at the Public Health Law Center also provide some really great resources. In fact, I'm going to be pulling up a few of theirs before the end of this webinar to show off, because they give a ton of, again, a little sometimes more technical language, but they also are really good at putting it into layman's terms for our policymakers to follow. And then the final kind of resource tab that we use, again, is that synthesis report, which I cannot highlight how helpful that is. And that's on the North Dakota Department of Health and Human Services website under the tab for tobacco prevention and control. And there's other great data. That's where you can find our local, or not local, our state data, our YBRS surveys. In fact, last month, the webinar for this group was Clint Boots from the Department of Health and Human Services explaining how to utilize all that data and how to navigate their website. And so if you weren't able to attend and you haven't watched the recording, I highly encourage you to do so before session, because you'll find some great ways to get the data you need to be able to talk specifically about that. And then, of course, some of our other national partners have some great fact sheets too. I know during Indoor Smoke-Free Air Law, the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network had some good resources, American Lung Association, American Heart Association, all those national partners, their web pages have good fact sheets and resources as well. So that's the education side of things, and where you can find resources to help educate. Now, advocacy and lobbying are two completely separate things. And for the most part, for most of you, we are going to recommend that you stick solely with the advocacy side of things. That is when you are talking about all of this education and how it relates to general health policy, such as the three-legged stool. So we know the three-legged stool is CDC recommended best practice serious policy for tobacco prevention and control. And so having clean indoor smoke-free air is vitally important, and talking about that with your legislators and educating them on how that benefits the population or citizens as a whole is advocating for that policy. Or if you are talking in terms of raising the price of tobacco products, you'll talk in those general terms of, we know when prices increase at a substantial amount all at once, it reduces youth initiation by a certain percentage. And I'd have to reference the most current data on that to be sure, but in the past it was saying for every dollar you increase, typically it reduces use rates by around 10%. And so advocating for raising the price of tobacco products in general and talking about the health benefits of a substantial increase all at once is advocating for that policy. And then the same thing goes when you're talking about the comprehensive program funding and why it's important to have funding for this particular program, and the health benefits that we see come out of it show that it not only saves people's lives, but it saves our North Dakota taxpayers a lot of money. North Dakota spends about $500 million a year on tobacco related disease and death and consequences just in our state of that tobacco use. And that does not count the ends use that is now taking over. That's specifically data around smoking and combustible commercial tobacco use. And so if you're talking about putting more program funding into reducing tobacco use in our state, it's going to help people be healthier, it's going to help them be more productive, and it's going to save our taxpayers a lot of money. Now, lobbying, on the other hand, is when you're talking to legislators or policymakers about a very specific bill or proposed ordinance or things like that. And you'll want to be much more careful in that realm. And many of you will be precluded from participating in lobbying unless you have, a specific role within your organization as a registered lobbyist. If you are going to lobby, you do have to register as a lobbyist in North Dakota and pay an annual fee to maintain that designation. You do that through the Secretary of State's website, and if it's something that you're interested in or want to make sure that you're following the rules on, you can, I can chat with you via telephone after the fact here and get you set up with how to be a lobbyist or how to register as a lobbyist. But lobbying is when you're specifically taking a bill or a proposed ordinance that's written and proposed for a piece of policy, and you're asking for a yes vote or a no vote on it. If you're just talking in general terms and educating about the policy and the benefits or the cons to that policy, that's advocating for or against a policy. Everybody can do that. There typically are not any rules in place around that, unless your employer has very specific ones written as company policies. But lobbying, on the other hand, is when you're specifically asking for a yes or no vote. And most government or city entities and a lot of employers don't allow for lobbying unless it's specifically on behalf of their organization or entity, and then you have to be a registered lobbyist. And so TFND is not asking you to lobby alongside us unless you're able to and want to, because we do that for you. That's one of TFND's main roles as an independent nonprofit, is that we are able to do the lobbying piece of things and specifically ask legislators to vote yes or no and try and influence them to vote the way we hope they would. And so that's lobbying, and I am a registered lobbyist, Andrew's a registered lobbyist, and we have funding specifically set aside to make sure that our lobbying never interacts or interferes with our grant related work or funding or some of our partner funding that we put in a separate bucket just for partner related services. We have unrestricted funding from private donations and entities that we utilize for our lobbying purposes. So that's that in a nutshell. Before I move on, are there any questions on the differences between education, advocacy, and lobbying?
I don't see anything in the chat that's come through.
Wonderful. Okay, so for the last couple of things, what might they say to us? This is something that is sometimes a little predictable, while at the same time always being unpredictable. We know some of the common arguments against our policy proposals because we've heard them come up over the years, over and over again. even when we've already debunked the myth around some of those. And so for the most part, a lot of our messaging and talking points will address what we already think we know they're going to say back to us as we propose our priorities list. That being said, there's always something new that comes up that we have to react to in real time. And so if, as you're doing your sit-down meetings in November and December with your policymakers, you come across things that aren't covered by some of the talking points that we have provided you, or some of the messaging that we have already shared on our platforms or with our partners, be sure to let TFND know, because we can help develop some messaging around that for you to use. And if you're hearing it, somebody else might be hearing it too. And so understand that as we send out talking points or message sheets, or as we build our social media plans and our posts that Andrew puts together so wonderfully, sometimes we might miss things or not know things are popping up in your specific community because they aren't popping up across the state as a whole. And so the more you can communicate some of that with us, the more we can be reactive and update all of our things so that you can have the resources that you need, but then also we can kind of be at the ready or be proactive in giving it across the state, so that as people come up, as people hear it come up outside of where you did, then we're ready to talk about it that way as well. I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of stumbling over my words in this, I think. Basically what I'm saying is we will have tons of resources that we'll be pushing out over these next 2 to 3 months. They hopefully will be as all-inclusive as we can possibly think of, but they might not be. And we want to make sure that we can continue to customize things as needed and update things as needed. And your help with that is hugely important. So here's that activity list I talked about, and some of you have already started working on this, which is amazing, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. But these are things that you can do in small bite-sized chunks. These are things that you can give to the coalitions that you have. If you have standing coalitions, great. Here's some homework for them at your next meeting. If you don't have a coalition already formed, this is an easy way to form one by having things to work on. Most coalitions are activity-based, and so having easy, manageable things for them to do with their friends and family, or other service clubs and organizations, or other clubs across the community, makes it easier for them to have a why in terms of why should I participate in this coalition. And so this checklist tries to take into account giving some of those activities without making them overwhelming. And so it can be as simple as just talking to 5 people that you know about policies and educating them. The more of that that's occurring in a community, and the more buzz you can create around why it is we're working on the things that we do, the easier it is for us to get things passed, both at the local and state levels. Our resolutions of support, we did release along with our priorities memo a few weeks back, and I'm so happy to say I'm already getting signed ones returned. So thank you so much to those of you who have already taken it to your community leaders, or to your organizations, or to your other health-related service clubs, and taking the initiative to get those into us early, because we do use those as part of our testimony during our hearings at session. And last go around, I think we had over 40 or just shy of 40 resolutions of support from all different kinds of organizations. And we would love to crush that number this year. And I think I've already received 7 or 8 back. And so that's awesome this early in our session season to have some signed resolutions in hand. So thank you. If you don't have those, they are posted on the website, and I'll show you where in just a bit. We also are gathering individual support cards again, and student postcards again. And at our Youth Action Summit, gosh, is it 2 weeks ago already? Time flies, last week, 2 weeks. I don't know, time is just going crazy fast. We already have several hundred of those that the students helped fill out while we were at the summit. But last year we had, or last session, we had 1,300 individual support cards and postcards that we were able to put on legislator desks ahead of the indoor smoke-free air law votes. And so we want to, again, have that amount or more this session. And our support cards are for each of the 3-legged stool policies. And then the student postcards are customizable. They're blank on the back. And so the student can write their personal story or a message to the legislators on any of the three-legged stool policies. And so those you can print yourselves if you want, or TFND has batches printed that we can mail you some small batches if you don't want to print them yourself, because we put them on a little bit heavier cardstock so that they're easier for the legislators to grab on and look at. You can also, like I said, do those in-person meetings that we've already discussed. You can do letters to the editor. You can do social media posts. You can, if you don't have a social media page, you can start a specific one just for a policy or for advocacy efforts. A good example of that is a few sessions ago, we had building a social media plan was the activity for the Youth Action Summit. And that year was the year that Legacy High School in Bismarck, right live at the summit, launched and created an Instagram page called Stop the Cloud. And they formed a service club at their high school called Stop the Cloud. And that all came out of just wanting a platform to be able to talk to people about this important issue. And so you could even do something similar to that if using your organization's social media isn't an option for you. You can always start your own customized social media page around a policy or around a concern so that you can put your advocacy posts and materials in there. You can do the same thing with newsletters and action email alerts. There are several of the local coalitions across the state that do great action alerts alongside TFNDs, or they share TFNDs alongside theirs during the legislative session. And so if you want to do something like that, we can help you get information on how to do that, or just be ready to kind of collaborate with us when it comes time to. There's lots of ways to participate in session now that it's all virtual. And again, I'll go through how to walk through those specific steps in December during that webinar. But submitting supportive or oppositional testimony as our hearings come up is awesome because it really shows from a variety of constituencies across the state all caring about the same issue. And so if we can help you get testimony submitted or give you ideas on who to talk to submit testimony, if you're not able to through your job, sometimes it's finding community champions or community volunteers that are willing to submit testimony on your behalf or in addition to yours. That can be hugely powerful as well. And then just spreading the word and inviting people to work on all of these activities with you. Many hands make light work is the saying. I also love the saying of many voices together create one big impact. And so using this as a checklist of activities for your local coalition or even just for yourself can help give you some kind of bite-sized chunks of what you can be doing when looking at the whole big picture feels overwhelming. Here are some different other kind of resources or trainings, if you will, if you want to learn more about how to do a specific thing. So we have coalition building webinars in here. This is all webinars that we've done in partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services since we launched this program back in 2021. And these are some of the, I think, more informative ones that you can utilize to kind of build out your plan over the coming months, to catch up on some of the things you might have missed if you haven't been able to attend very many of these webinars. I'd highlight the coalition building ones, connecting with policymakers. It's not just Andrew or myself or Abby doing these webinars. We invite in lots of outside experts and guest speakers to lead these too. And so I think it's kind of a nice way to show support for our partners, but then also to get more resources and more perspectives into your hands. And so partnering with schools is another really good one to look at kind of the youth angle and some of what is happening in our schools. Campaign planning for local initiatives, if you have any ordinance work that you want to do in addition to session work. And then, like I said, last month, the one at the end here was Clint's from the Department of Health's North Dakota Tobacco Use Trends and Data Sources. Again, this is where we get a lot of our data for our testimony pieces. And so I'd highly recommend looking at it for any data that you might need for state. And sometimes it even goes down into demographic or community level data. And so that's that, and I'll show you where on the TFND website you can find these links. But if anyone wants these slides after the webinar, these are all hyperlinked within the slides and you can have them that way too. Okay, so that's the end of my slideshow portion of things. I would take any questions that there might be at this time, and then I'll show my couple of website links that, and a couple of PDFs that I wanted to about topics I've referenced in the last 40 minutes.
I don't see anything in the chat. I have opened up mics and cameras if anybody wants to ask Heather any questions. You are still sharing your screen.
Okay, I'm going to pull up websites
Oh,
then.
sorry, that one.
Double whammy of me.
I'm just seeing myself twice. It's very confusing.
I know, it's weird, right?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, so here is Tobacco Free North Dakota's resources tab, and under here is where you can find links to all of our individual support cards and resolutions of support. It's also where you can find the synthesis report that I keep talking about, and I'll just click on that really quick to show you what it looks like, because this thing is the best. If you
will just make a quick mention, the new one will be coming out.
Yes.
So when you're referencing that, please do use the new one.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, this is last sessions. And so every January-ish, the new one comes out on session year. And so it's a biannual product. Every other January, the fresh one will come out. So the 2025 version is what we'll be waiting on. But until then, this is still, I think, a relevant document to use and reference, because it just has such great information. You can always say, you know, updated data is coming, but the overarching themes are going to stay the same. And as you can see, it's just super professionally done and well done. And it covers so much in terms of what our policymakers typically don't see or deal with in their daily lives or jobs or even as policymakers. And so to get them this kind of education in one big document, I think is huge. And so we talk about this a lot during session. I'll pull pages directly out of it when I'm talking to legislators as leave behinds or highlights. It's got lots of maps. It's a huge document. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just kind of scrolling so you get an idea of what it looks like and how you can pull pieces out of it. It does a great job of telling stories too. I know we talk a lot about telling our own personal stories and how to tell the story of the work that you're doing in your specific communities. And this document pulls snapshots out of a wide variety of programming and a wide variety of communities all across the state. And so some of you might be seeing yourselves pop up in some of these pictures as I scroll through this. You might have been featured in a past document. So anyway, that is the synthesis report. The new one will come out. Until then, please use this one. Like I said, I can't overstate enough how much I love this document. And if Melissa Chapman's on right now, she's going to be just smiling big. She loves that I use this so much. Anyway, so that's the synthesis report. And that, like I said, can be found right on TFND's website. We have the last 3 versions on here, and we'll add the new one on here as soon as it's released in January, if it's January. The other resources, useful resources and links tab that is good for you to look at. This is where all our webinars are housed, along with some other study information and other information. But this is if you want the webinar links without having to save slides or document sheets. This is where you can find them, and they're updated in real time as each webinar happens. So after today's webinar link will be right down here at the bottom. And so you can always find out and revisit those as needed. If you're looking for anything, this is quitting related. If you want, this is quitting materials ahead of session or during session. We have updated statistics on this page, and then lots of the resources that you can print yourself if you want any of the flyers or business cards. We do continue to print print them at TFND, and we will mail them to you if you want that way. But if you don't have the time to wait for us, or if you have printing capabilities within your budget yourselves, this is where you can find the links to do that. And then there are specific tabs for each of the 3-legged stool if you want specific resources around those. Andrew's done a nice job of building out some of our web pages to be a little bit more user-friendly and to have more resources kind of broken down into categories so that you can find them a little bit more easier. And so that is how to find good stuff on TFND's website under the resources tab. There's lots of other tabs you can explore and have fun with. I won't cover those today, but I just wanted to point out where to find resources. For the Public Health Law Center, I'll just quickly loop back around since I referenced them a couple times. This is one of the new and emerging things nationwide that we're covering and watching for, and we haven't heard any rumblings or seen anything in North Dakota on this yet. But that doesn't mean it won't happen, similar to how we monitor and watch preemption language and bills across the country and making sure that they're not sneaking their way into North Dakota bills. We will be watching pretty closely for anything that's relating to state e-cigarette or ENDS or electronic tobacco registry bills. And so there's a great one-pager. I'll send the links along with the slides to these 2 pages I'm showing from Public Health Law Center to Abby to disseminate to the entire group. But this gives kind of a nice background on what it is and why we're concerned. And you can read this for yourself, but in summary, it basically what's happening is there are industry-backed bills popping up across the nation that are calling themselves e-registries or ENDS registries or electronic tobacco registries. And they almost give the illusion of taking care of a problem when really it almost exasperates the issue or creates additional new problems. And so as legislators encounter these, they think, oh, this is great. We're putting some regulations around these electronic products. It almost gives them permission to be done then. They are almost like, okay, we got that through, all done. But what it does is it creates a huge backlog of regulatory difficulties for whoever's trying to implement or enforce these bills and the language that they use. And so it ends up creating more of a bottleneck in the regulating entity so that the industry can put more products on the market without them being regulated at all. It kind of inundates the states that are putting these in place to being able to call through and identify and track and enforce the different unregistered products. The FDA has only actually approved 23 e-products, if you will. And so there are a couple of states that are trying to turn this on its head and take away the industry's advantage by putting together regulation or ordinance language or policy language that utilizes the 23 that are already approved and saying nothing else can happen unless it's FDA approved. And then that makes it a little bit more manageable to just say, well, you're not one of the 23, you're not approved, or you're not covered by our policy or our registry. And that could be an effective way to counteract these industry-backed registry bills. But yeah, it's definitely something concerning that we're watching. We want to make sure that it doesn't give the industry any more loopholes than they already have, because they have enough of them, and that it doesn't inundate our state regulatory entities or departments from being able to enact or pursue, bad actors or, companies that aren't following the rules they're supposed to be following. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I talk too fast. And so that's why we're watching these. So here is, I think, an interesting graphic that they put out. It's the map of what so far is going on, and they're attempting to update this on a very regular basis. And so if we see something going on in North Dakota, we'll for sure let them know so that we can get ours updated. But right now, like I said, there's nothing happening in our state, but we want to be prepared for if there is, because look at all this across the country, you guys. Look at how fast this has popped up. With these e-registry bills. So yellow, to be clear, is they're considering one right now. The red has already passed one, and that's why we're understanding a little bit more about the problems they're creating instead of solving. And then the 2 states in blue are attempting to do it kind of the, I don't know if I could say preferred way, but the public health minded way, where it would be less of a problem or issue for their governments to enact and control. And I'm going to guess there will be questions from you guys on this. I'll be very upfront and say I'm not the expert yet on this. This is something I just learned about last July from Tobacco Control Network and a webinar they hosted on these things. And then Public Health Law Center has been chiming in. And so I'm still getting up to speed myself on all the nuances of this and what to watch for. But any information or materials I get, I'll be sure to share. And any questions you have, still feel free to send me, because I can investigate and do some research. And if you're thinking of them, other people will be thinking of them, and hopefully I'll be thinking of them. And we can see if we can't get ourselves up to speed, just in case anything does come up this session. If it doesn't come up this session, I'm going to guess it's not too far behind, since the rest of the country is already looking pretty inundated. And I see a lot in the Midwest and in our neighbors. And so I would assume it will come our way eventually. Okay, the last thing I'll pull up here is just there are some legislative deadlines to be aware of. We will be working to have all our bills sponsored ahead of time, so that they can be submitted, if not during pre-file, then right away when session opens, which is typically the case for ours. Session does open January 7th, and that first week is usually a pretty fast and furious week, as all the new legislators are getting up to speed and acclimated. The following week is when we start seeing limits on how many bills can be introduced by legislators, and then the cutoff is by the end of January. We see that crossover is February 28th this year. That means all the bills and resolutions submitted initially have to be done by then, so that they can switch chambers and go on if they haven't failed. And you can see that they anticipate wrapping up session by mid to late April once again. I know they say May 2nd is the 80th day, but our legislators typically try and save anywhere from 3 to 6 days in case they have to do anything during the interim. So it doesn't typically go to 80 days. They always try and save at least a few days. And so it would end probably near the back half of April, as a for instance. So that's that sheet. And then this is where you find these types of resources. If you go on to nd.gov and click on government, and then go to state government, that is where I'm at right now. And you scroll on down to the legislative branch and go legislative assembly. And we'll walk through this in detail come December on how to use this page, but this is where you can start kind of perusing around and looking at different things. This is where you can pull up any bill that you're interested in looking at. There's all kinds of session information and assembly information. This is after November 5th, where all the local, or not all the district lawmakers' photos and bios and contact information will be put on, and I'll show you that in December as well. But this is just a great resource to start getting used to looking at and using. And this is where I got the deadline sheet that I just showed you a minute ago. But there's tons and tons of resources on this state government legislative website. So that's everything I have for you all today. Are there any last questions, comments? Oops. I think I've stopped sharing, if that's correct. Yes? Okay.
You have, yes. Yeah, nothing in the chat, but like I said, feel free to raise your hand and come off mute and ask questions if you have any.
I understand that was a lot of information an hour. So as it sinks in, if you think of things in the next few days or a few weeks, do not hesitate to reach out to Andrew or myself and let us know. And we will do our best to be responsive and get you anything that you might be needing. All right. Thank you so much for attending. I see we had 27 people today. That's an awesome group. I really appreciate you spending time with us today. And thanks to Abby for hosting, our hostess with the mostess every month.
Thank you for that information. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything else.
All right. Well, have a great day.
Have a great day.
Take care.